Hey everyone, welcome to week 9. So this is the final week that we will be working with our friend James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. So this week you are going to finish the book and you're going to look ahead to your second project, and I'm going to give you the directions and rubric for project number 2. It is incredibly similar to project number 1, but I'll go over the discrepancies and little differences that come up with the new project, and also give you a few more tips on how to improve your project from our first time around. Okay, so in quick response to some of the submissions that you had from last week, please make sure that you are reading for nuance in Baldwin's argument in The Fire Next Time and reading the work in its entirety, because some of you kind of miss Baldwin's overall argument. Now, I will acknowledge that Baldwin is incredibly sophisticated, and oftentimes his level of sophistication and complexity can make it a little bit difficult to kind of tease out specifically what is going on. But also, I think that whenever we read text that can be a little bit controversial or provocative in nature, sometimes we kind of want to separate to our own philosophical or political camps. So in this instance, when Baldwin is talking about something like race, our country tends to see the idea of something like race as a binary. You can have one position on race or another position on race, but anything in between is something that feels foreign to us, right? So that is not what is going on with Baldwin. So I saw a lot of you picked up on a particular quote where Baldwin highlights this idea that white people are, quote, cursed and are devils and are about to be brought down, end quote. And a lot of you attributed this idea to Baldwin and talked about how this led to a mishandling of race relations and led to things like, or could lead to things like looting and violence, etc., etc. Now, while I understand that some of the things that were brought up in the post are relevant to our discussions of race today, and it's important to understand Baldwin's full argument here. So in that instance, he's quoting the ideas of the Nation of Islam, right? And not only that, but Baldwin explicitly refutes this idea. That is incredibly important to understand. So as someone who came from the Christian church, Baldwin had a problem, an issue with the way that some Christian sects, sects, would bring up the idea that Africans are descendants of Ham, and consequently are a cursed people, which would lead to things like enslavement and mistreatment. So he takes that idea, acknowledges that that is an absurd idea, and then compares it to the idea that the Nation of Islam has, particularly this notion about white people. And he says that both of these ideas are ill-fitting. They don't work. They're ridiculous. Now, that's important, but it's also important to understand that Baldwin is acknowledging that this idea that the Nation of Islam has, its credit is that it's offering African Americans a sense of empowerment, right? So there's something that they can do with all the mistreatment that they are receiving. So it's not placing them in a passive situation to where they can do nothing about it. It's giving them a sense of hope and empowerment. And he acknowledges that that sentiment is the good thing about it, but it's premised in this kind of ill-fitting, harmful theology. Okay, so a very nuanced idea there. And it's important that we see that idea all the way through before we start to critique Baldwin, because I feel like a lot of you had a misunderstanding of what was going on there. Okay, so that's super important. So you've got to understand that Baldwin is refuting that idea of the Nation of Islam, and even acknowledges that the Nation of Islam's desire to have this segregationist future in the way that many kind of large swaths of white America wanted as well, segregation. He argues that that's not going to work either. It just doesn't fit, because he argues that all of our ethnicities and racial groups in America were interconnected, right? We're interdependent on one another, and that our destinies are intertwined with each other. So it doesn't make sense that we would separate. And he gives kind of like an object lesson here with a guy that I think was his taxi driver, or someone who's giving him a ride. So make sure you're paying attention to that. So this notion of segregation does not work for Baldwin. He says that the only solution that we can have to the problem of race in America is acknowledging our past in its entirety. And this, I think, is something that's really important, especially in relationship to all this discussion we had or are having as a country around things like critical race theory, et cetera, et cetera. But he is encouraging Americans as a whole, let's look at our past, understand that we have marred history that is incredibly problematic, not in its entirety, right? So as Americans, we have lots of history to be proud of, but we also have lots of history to not be proud of. And in acknowledging that, from Baldwin's perspective, is not foolhardy or stupid. It's just being honest, right? It's just being honest. That essentially there are things that we have to understand happened, and that affects our present realities. So the only solution then is to understand the present realities that we are in and try to adjust and fix them instead of working towards some sort of completely new reality to where we're a separate group of people, right? So that's not what's going to work. Now, in light of all this, what Baldwin is really arguing here is that when we look at the struggles and the tension that we have in terms of race relations, and that term is even kind of outdated and problematic as it is, but just for lack of a better term, Baldwin's pushing against this notion that what a lot of kind of talk shows and journalism outlets would call the black problem in America. And even in this day and age, saying that, hopefully to you, feels very ill-fitting and even offensive. So Baldwin argues that it is in fact not a black problem, that black people, in this instance during the civil rights movement, that he's acknowledging it, are being mistreated, right? That is not a black problem. The problem is the people that are doing the mistreatment. So Baldwin argues that racism, in this instance, is a white problem, and that it's not fair to assume that black people should have a role in fixing it. Namely, that it's unfair to have the expectation of black America to have more patience and more grace in order to bring about some sort of resolution, right? Now, keep in mind, like that's a nuanced argument. So don't oversimplify it. Don't make it into a straw man and say that James Baldwin says that black Americans shouldn't be graceful and kind. No, that's not what he said, right? He's arguing that there's no reason to expect that black Americans should show more grace and kindness and goodwill than their white counterparts when it comes to solving the problem of race in America, right? And that's important to understand. And the reason why he argues is because it is not the problem of African Americans, right? So really complex. Hopefully you followed all of that. That was some word salad. So now, the solution to all of this, according to Baldwin, somewhat surprisingly, is, and as I said here at the risk of sounding corny, love. He argues that love is the solution to this problem. Now, that form of love might not be what you are expecting, so I'll let you finish the book and kind of determine what you think this love looks like and who's responsible for showing this love, receiving it, etc., etc. Okay? So you're going to finish the book, and then you're going to look at project number 2, the directions and rubric. Extremely similar to project number 1. I'm going to highlight just a few differences here. And please understand that this project is not due this week. It's not due this week. In fact, you do not have a graded assignment that is due this week. This project will be due next week. So what you're doing now, after you finish the book, you're going to start brainstorming, planning, even beginning project number 2. Now, in project number 1, you were dealing with a different scenario. So you only have the fire next time to work with, right? So you're not choosing a particular text. You're just working with the fire next time. Now, if you're going to do the essay option, you have to answer these questions. What is Baldwin's overall argument regarding race in America? Make sure you understand it. Make sure that you're using the documentary. Make sure that you're using the other resources that I gave you, from lit charts to whatever it is that I've handed out throughout this unit. Make sure that you have a good understanding of what Baldwin's argument is and that you're not reducing it to a straw man or an oversimplification, because it is an extremely nuanced argument. Okay? How does the book respond to the significant historical and cultural elements of its day. So this might require you to do a little more research on the civil rights movement and try to target what it is that Baldwin is specifically speaking to. Then you're going to extrapolate those ideas and kind of frame them in modern day issues. So question 3, how would Baldwin respond to the national movement following the death of George Floyd? So you're going to imagine what Baldwin's philosophy would look like applied to today, right? And so obviously this is a little bit of guesswork on your part. It might require you to do some more research on George Floyd if you are lacking in understanding there. And even if you do feel like you have a good grasp on it, make sure that you're using good resources that you're pulling from TCC's internet databases, right? And finally, what is your critical response to Baldwin and his arguments? So this is your chance to reflect upon the ideas and philosophies of James Baldwin as they are accurately represented. So once again, do not reduce these to a straw man argument. Actually understand what Baldwin's argument is. And then, do you agree or disagree with it? Why or why not? And understand that your ideas and philosophies are a product of your environment, of your social context, just like James Baldwin's, right? And as I've said over and over again throughout this course, which is so important to keep in mind, that if you grew up in the same scenario as someone else, namely in this situation, James Baldwin, you would have the same ideas as James Baldwin, and vice versa. That's important to understand. Okay? Now, so it's going to require you to do some research. So if you have forgotten how to access the TCC databases, go back to module number 5. There's some links there posted, or maybe I think it's module 5. It might be module 4, but I'm pretty sure it's module 5 about how to access the TCC databases and use them if you've forgotten. And I'll send another video out next week to remind you if you've forgotten as well. So 1,500 words, just like the first one, MLA format. You need to have quotes from the Fire Next Time riddled throughout your essay. I need to see that you are deeply invested in the text, that you understand the text, that you're using quotes from it. So if you remember back in a previous module when I gave you the link to the lit charts, summarization and analysis of the Fire Next Time, there's a great page on there for key quotes that'll be really helpful to use as you're weaving in quotes throughout your essay as well. And then 3 outside sources that you're using to kind of bolster your argument from the TCC databases. So that means that you're going to have 3 outside sources and then the Fire Next Time. So you'll have 4 overall sources in your works cited page. Okay? Artistic expression. So once again, I just want to reiterate what's here in yellow. If you are not an artistic person, do not attempt this project. You know who you are. So I had some beautiful, beautiful representations of themes, ideas, and philosophies from the previous project, but I also got some that were not. So some people that just used like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with pencil, and it was just too simplistic. So imagine how much work you would have to do for the full essay, right? That's a lot of work, right? A 1,500 page essay to where you're using quotes from the text, you're pulling from outside sources. You've got to understand that if you're not putting forth what looks like that amount of work for the artistic expression, then you're probably not as engaged in it as you should be. So keep that in mind. So same thing here. You're going to be exploring the ideas of the Fire Next Time. Your primary goal is to capture and articulate your interpretation of Baldwin's argument and his ideas as a product of their context in American history. Okay, so you need to give me 500 words that explains what's going on here, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever colors, medium. Some of you did sculptures, some of you just had all sorts of awesome things that you did. So explain to me what's going on, right? Imagine that you are presenting this at a museum and you're telling me what's going on, right? So make sure that you're doing that. And you need to give me some quotes from the text as well, and then just pull something from the TCC internet database. I need one quote from an outside source that's going to bolster it as well, just to show me that you're doing some research here and understanding Baldwin, the civil rights movement, or the book itself. Okay? The key things, you just got to show me that you understand the text. I think what's key here is understanding Baldwin's argument, and also that you put a substantial amount of work into it that makes me think this person did just as much or more work than someone who did the essay. And the same thing with the graphic novel as well. So just like the first one, 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper covering at least 18 panels, right? So that's just like different kind of pictures and images. The size of those is up to you, right? It's up to you. But same thing, show me that you understand the text and that you're putting a substantial amount of work into it. All right. So the rubrics are still down below. So if you have a question about how I'm grading, take a look at that. If you still have questions, let me know. So make sure that you understand specifically what the assignment, what the directions are asking you before you begin. That way you can be as successful as possible when you start this project. If you have any questions, connect with me during office hours or email me like you have been. I will be happy to answer any questions at all. And also, there were some really cool projects the first time around where students got really creative. And as I said in the first one, if you have a different idea for rendering this information other than a written essay or an artistic project, by all means, ask me about it. So I had podcasts that were submitted in the first round that were excellent. In fact, I'm thinking about adding kind of an actual rubric for podcast crafting in the project for the future. But that was wonderful. If you want to make a video that kind of renders a particular element of James Baldwin, you can do that, right? So if you've got a different idea that's you think is a great way for your skill set to present this information, run it by me. You might be surprised what I'll say yes to. As long as you can show me that you understand this text and that you're thinking critically about it, I'm fine. Okay? Whew, that was a long one. All right, y'all are wonderful humans. I will see you later.